Like chicken dressing. Cute.
Good morning, everyone. This is Angelica with the Council for Opportunity and Education, and you are here for the Connect, Discuss, and Learn update from the Department of Education today for SSS and McNair professionals. We will begin in about 3 to 5 minutes. It will be muted. You as a participant will not be able to talk, but you could go ahead if you have any questions once the webinar has gone into some of the things. You can ask your questions in the Q&A box found on your toolbox, whether it's on the top center or the bottom center, depending on how you have your Zoom account set up. So again, we will start in about 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you. Also, one thing, somebody raised their hand. We don't have the capability to unmute you. So go ahead, if you have a question now that you need answered before we start, you can put it into the Q&A box. Thank you. Again, and we'll start in about 3 to 5 minutes. Maureen, I'm checking your audio. Are you there?
I am here.
Okay, perfect. Terrence, oh, you're connecting to audio right now. Perfect.
Hi, Jelly. Can you hear me?
I can, Terrence. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. I forgot I'm the host for this meeting.
You're okay. I can log in and start it, so that's not a problem at all. Okay, we're going to give people 2 more minutes. Almost everybody that is supposed to be on is on, so at 11:02 Eastern time we'll start, okay? All right, well, good morning, everyone. This is Angelica with the Council for Opportunity and Education, and you are here for as I said before, hey, sorry, the Connect, Discuss, and Learn for college programs today. We will start off with our president, Maureen Hoyler, giving you an update from the Department of Ed that took place last week at our board meeting. And then our effective practices is we will share an interview that Terrence Ham, our Associate Vice President for Communications and Marketing, had with Sarah Goldrick Robb, who oversees the Hope Center and talks about the emergency grant aid and her research of where it needs to go and where institutions should be putting their energies at. So at this time, I am going to turn it over to Maureen.
Well, thanks a whole lot, Angelica, and we're delighted that as many of you were able to join us as you can, as we're able. So as Jelly indicated last week, the COE board had its May meeting virtually. We were joined by Dr. Bert Johnson and as well as Chris McGarren, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for higher education programs in the Department of Education. So Dr. Bert Johnson is a civil servant reporting to a political appointee, Dr. McCarran. So let's go to the next slide. So, and I guess the next slide. So we are pressing the department to answer the unanswered questions, and Ed has indicated that they plan to get frequently asked questions out in the next several weeks. Probably unfortunately for us, my impression is that these frequently asked questions will not be trio specific, but they will cover all the discretionary programs within the Department of Education, which includes things like child care and Title III and Title V, and so within the higher education area. So COE's expectation is that even when the first set of questions come out, that there may be additional questions raised rather than answered by these questions. But we did make some progress at the meeting, and let me share that with you. So next slide, please. So for McNair and for student support services programs that are not in their last year, we did learn that there will be no limit to the amount of money that you can carry over from 2019-20 to 2020-21. We also learned that if there's any veterans upward bound joining us today that where the staff has not been able to get to their offices, that the department will provide a 2-week extension to submit your APRs, so to June 15th. Now, if you're going to need to go beyond June 15th and you need direction, and after you have really pressed your institution to be able to visit your office, practice social distancing at your office, please contact Ms. Villapando. So next slide. I'm going to go again over carryover. What happens with carryover is that essentially the G5 system leaves the money in your account, and your institution is still able to draw down that money. That means that you will have that money plus your new award for the 2021 year. You still will have to submit a budget that incorporates an estimate of that money. But wait to submit that budget until the department releases its frequently asked questions, because they can't answer it. Now, you may want to send it to your program specialist now, just to have documentation that you're trying to get direction, that a note that says something like, "We hope you're doing well in the pandemic. X University's understanding is that until the higher education programs releases its frequently asked questions, you cannot provide direction on how to move forward in a virtual environment." Something like that, so that you have in your, you don't want to insult them by asking them for permission to do something they can't give you, but at the same time, you want to have some documentation that you are in contact with them and seeking their direction. So next slide, please. Okay, during our conversations, the department requested recommendations from the COE board, and we recommended with respect to stipends that the McNair stipend be raised to $5,200 for the period of the pandemic. So that would be for the 1920 program year and the 2021 program year. So this is our rationale for asking for that increase. The next slide, please. We also recommended that the stipend for veterans upward bound be raised to $100 each month, that student support services programs be allowed to provide a stipend of $100 per month, and that the department remove the match requirement on grant aid for students, and also that the minimum grant be lowered to $50, and also that the requirement in the law that grant aid first meet the needs of all first and second year students be waived. Next slide, please. Now the action on stipends, the action to lower the grant aid minimum and waive the match is something that would only be effective for the period of the CARES Act, because the department would be utilizing information, power, authority that they're given in the CARES Act, and that ends at the end of the 2021 program year. So I think we have some unanswered questions for the department, and I'm going to go over those and then go to your questions. So we can get rid of one. We know the ceiling on carryover. For student support services in the last year of their grants, there is a provision in the OMB Super Circular which allows the department to extend the last day of the grant. So in this instance, it's August 31st, 2000. And that would be extended. They could extend it all the way to August 31st, 2001. It has the same effect as allowing carryover, but it's a different authority within the OMB regulations. 3 discusses the waiver of, for grant aid, which we already discussed. Again, in terms of substantial progress, the department has already, this is answered, that the department will determine whether you've met substantial progress in 1920 by looking to see if you served 85% of the clients or students you were intended to serve in 1819. So if anybody has not served, did not serve in 1819, so for the last APR that you submitted, at least 85% of the students you were funded to serve, if you would contact Ms. Villapando. The issue about the allowability of costs for canceled activities is still an open question. Although again, the OMB memo allows such costs to be allowable, but the Department of Education has to trigger that. So the next page, please. Once we get answered the extension numbers and direct grant aid numbers and the stipend issue, the next issue that we really have to press the department on is, and this is particularly true for McNair, not for student support services, to renegotiate their numbers for 2019, to renegotiate their objectives for 2019-20. For both student support services and McNair, there may be issues of renegotiating retention objectives, placement in graduate school objectives for McNair, continuation in graduate school objectives, because especially for low income and first generation students, we know that, or we certainly anticipate that many students' educational plans are disrupted, and we may need to lower those. You may need to lower those objectives in order to get your prior experience points. The department continues to anticipate that the first student support services slate, so the major student support services slate, everybody that is not in the funding band, will be released in early July. We spoke to the Veterans Upward Bound. We still need an answer about seniors who have graduated participating in later activities of McNair. We spoke to 11. And the stipends in a way, we hope, minimizes the need for other incentives. So again, this question isn't moot question 12, but if the stipend, if student support services is allowed to give stipend, and McNair is allowed to give larger stipends, the need for other incentives hopefully be lessened. So Angelica, do you want to go to the questions at this time?
Sure. Okay. So I just want to let people know that we are recording this, and we will send the recording out in our weeklies, what we do, since this is a free webinar. Since this is a free webinar, we send them out to the whole world in our weekly. Our PD weekly usually comes out either on Friday or sometime during the weekend. So the slide deck will be there along with the recording. All right, so now, Maureen, some of these may have been asked before, but I think it's still worth going over again.
Sure.
Will SSS programs be given carry for options for funding?
Okay, that's a question that we still don't have an answer to. Again, technically, student support services programs in their last year cannot carry forward money. That the use of the term carry forward is not appropriate. So but the effect of what is available to the department to grant, which is a extension of the ending date of your grant, we're still waiting to see if they will trigger that authority. They have that authority. We believe they will trigger it, but it is not a given at this time.
So someone asked about if you could go over again about substantial progress and renegotiating objectives.
Okay, so substantial progress in your grant award document, the Department of Education essentially reserves the right to cancel continued funding of any multi-year grant if in your work in the current year, you don't make substantial progress in carrying out those objectives. Now, how they judge substantial progress differs by program and the year you're in the grant. But by the time you get to the third year of your grant, which all student support services and McNair programs are in, if you do not serve at least 85% of the students that you're funded to serve, you're deemed not to have made substantial progress, and then your funding for the following year is discontinued. Now, typically what happens in a year is that your program specialist looks at the money that an institution draws down and checks with a group. It's not necessarily a scientific group of directors, and says, we want confirmation that you've served 85% of the numbers that you were funded to serve in 2000. For this year, it would have been 2019-20. In lieu of that, for this year, the department is going to look not at numbers you are serving in 1920, but in the numbers that you served and reported on your annual performance report in 1819. So that will give you substantial progress going. So everybody who served 85% of their numbers for 1819 will have been deemed to have made enough progress in 1920 in order to continue. We still have outstanding how substantial progress will be determined for 2021, but that is a little bit down the road.
Okay. Couldn't
Oh,
hear.
I'm sorry, Angelica. So that
Oh,
doesn't
sorry about
have
that.
anything to do with objectives. Okay, that doesn't have anything.
Sorry about that.
No, I forgot about it. We substantial progress and objectives, although they overlap, they're not related to each other. Okay, but so now we're worried about how will prior experience be determined for the 1920 year. Okay, and for some of you, it was unrealistic to meet your objectives in 1920 because students, your retention objective, for example, that it was harder to retain students in college in 1920 than it was in 1819 because of the disruption of the pandemic. So you may want to lower your retention objective so that you can achieve prior experience points. Or for McNair, it may have been harder to place the number of students directly into graduate school because of the academic disruption. So, so that's an outstanding question. That once program specialists are free to work with you, one of the things that we need to be able to make sure is that you're able to renegotiate your objective. If that isn't clear, somebody ask another question and I can try to answer it in different words, but hopefully that is clear.
Do students have to be enrolled during the current semester to award grant aid, for example, summer, or is it possible to give grant aid if they are enrolled for the fall out of this year's budget?
It depends when your fall term begins. So if your fall term begins before August 31st, you should be able to award grant aid for the next semester. I don't think, unless there's that extension, that if your fall term begins after August 31st, that it would be prudent to do so.
Someone said they couldn't hear your answer about the SSS slate would be released.
Early July.
So someone's asking, no limit on carry forward. Please clarify. Was this only for programs not in their last year of their grant cycle?
It is only for programs not in the last year of their grant cycle. Other programs, people in the last year of their grant cycle don't qualify for carry forward. For them to be able to continue to spend money that they don't have spent by August 31st of 2020, the department has to extend the last date of your grant. It has the same effect as carry forward, but it is a different authority within the department.
I am being told by our grant office that we cannot purchase technology without anything writing from the Department of Ed. Also, that it is not allowable to purchase items like laptops during the last year of a grant being reauthorized. Could you please tell me if the department has put anything in writing regarding tech?
No, the department has not, and the reason the department has not is because your grants office is wrong. Okay? Your grants office is wrong. We had a webinar yesterday with legal counsel who was very clear that this would be an allowable cost. Now, your problem is, though, now, if they haven't let you do it by the time the student is done with the semester, what is the justification for purchasing laptops for them to use in the summer? So you may have lost your window for it to be a reasonable decision to purchase it. Angelica, I'd like your thoughts on that.
So in the regulations, it states that you can buy hardware or software to help administer your project, helps to record keep. I think having students without internet capabilities, without students having a laptop, you cannot do this. They cannot do their academics and you cannot do your services. So I think it's pretty clear in the regulations that it states that you can do this.
So, but the issue is, what services are you going to provide in June, July, and August that require your student, that where you're regularly working with a student virtually?
Right, if they're not in summer school, I mean, but see, the thing is,
you could still be advising them,
right,
but you need a program of service that requires that they have this this technology.
And I'm saying multiple services, you know, workshops,
academic advising, individual academic advising, maybe academic support for classes that they had to drop. Now, but your problem is you've got, as I understand it, is you have a grant specialist that that just doesn't, that is afraid to allow you to do this. So, so I guess the question is, what assistance, absent the department telling you that you can do this, would be helpful to you? So I think if you would contact me or Angelica after this, and maybe we can talk about some way that we can be helpful to you in being able to do this.
Okay, this is Sss Siphons. Where in the CARES Act is the legislative authority that allows SSS to offer stipends?
It isn't in the CARES Act. What the CARES Act allows the department to do is to waive anything in the TRIO section. In theory, they could let you use, the department use all the TRIO money to pay faculty. Okay, that's theory, okay? But so they have the authority to waive any legislative or regulatory requirement. That's why so saying you can offer a stipend is making something allowable that is not currently allowable in the legislation.
Okay. We're a two-year college. I'm not concerned about meeting our objectives this year, but I'm concerned about my graduation transfer objective for the 2019-2020 year cohorts in the 4 years. Will the department be taking this under consideration? Again,
you're going to have to renegotiate your objectives in order for that. They're not going to take something into consideration. You're going to have to, you know, they're not going to say, oh, if you made 80% of your objective, we're going to waive, you know, that's not what needs to happen. The objective actually has to be modified, but now is not the time to do it. For student support services who are looking, they don't necessarily have to look at the 2021 year, because the first year of your grant, but you're worried about, okay, he's worried about like graduation and transfer for students that were served this year, and in the 4 years that number he won't reach that number. So that's something that as you negotiate your budget for the 2021, your new grant, that's something we're going to have to press to be taken into consideration so that you can lower those numbers.
Okay, I am going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to our effective practice, and then we will come back and answer more questions. Someone said, I'm not clear on this. Are SSS programs only going to be responsible for serving at least 85% of the required number served?
No, you're always responsible for serving 100% of the students you were funded to serve. However, they're not going to discontinue. They're not going to. They will not. For example, if you're on the slate and they look and say, well, you didn't make substantial progress in 1920, therefore we're not going to fund you in 2021. They have said, as long as you met your numbers, 85% of your numbers in 1819, you're not at risk of losing continued funding. But it doesn't make anybody less responsible for meeting their number. It is just a policy where they exercise their responsibility to make sure that the money that they award is utilized appropriately.
All right, we are going to turn this over to the effective practice for this one. I will turn it over to Terrence Ham to play the interview between him and Sarah Goldrick-Robb.
Just 1 second, Shelley.
No problem.
Graduate level.
Yeah, so we are first and foremost an action research center. And what that means is that we do studies, but the whole purpose of our studies is to help improve practice and policy. And to that end, we're not just a bunch of PhDs sitting in a research shop. We also have hired people who have done the work. So for example, there's a program called Single Stop that has operated for years now at the Community College of Philadelphia. It's a really important program that helps some of the very most low-income students. And the Community College of Philadelphia's former Single Stop director is now our director at the Hope Center, running a lot of our community outreach work in partnerships with higher education. I have to be honest, we are still building out our technical assistance work, particularly for secondary programs. We haven't done as much in that regard. But when it comes to helping students, for example, think about college or transition to higher education effectively and actually stay there, I would highly recommend our series called Beyond the Food Pantry. It's on the resource section of our website. And there's a whole set of things that you could talk to students about. So I'll give you a quick example. As a student is considering, perhaps right now, how in the world they're going to afford college this fall, maybe they're already planning to go, they're probably panicking a bit because maybe they've lost their job and they're not going to have as much money. Many people will explain to them how to apply for scholarships. We think that's important, but we actually want you to talk to them about how they're going to lower their utility bills, right? We want you to get really real with them about cutting every cost they possibly can. And there are programs for low-income folks around utilities, and many college students don't realize they exist or don't think that they're eligible. So we have a Beyond the Food Pantry brief on exactly that. So those are some examples.
And so we wanted to focus on your resource guide for emergency grant aid, which is especially timely given the CARES Act infusion of funds for this purpose. And so beyond the food pantry, I understand there are other resources there, but what can educators working with low-income students find particularly useful in this guide?
Yeah, I mean, the guide really tries to help people think through the trade-offs that are happening right now. And I think we have to acknowledge that there are trade-offs, right? We're in, here, pick a parallel, right? So right now we're hearing a lot about the frontline workers, right? The nurses in hospitals. And we're becoming increasingly aware that they are going to have to pick and choose who they help because there's so much need. The same thing is happening right now with these students. And the way we pick and choose, we can object to having to do it, but we have to figure out how to do the picking and choosing really well. In other words, we have to learn how to triage. And the resource guides, especially around the emergency aid, talk about doing that. We also talk about doing it in an ethical way. So medical ethicists, for example, have talked about what to do when you only have a limited number of ventilators and too many people who need them. We can use the same principles when we have too few emergency aid dollars compared to the people who need them. The basic approach is to prioritize. So to say, these are the students who most need the help. These are the students who need it, but they're kind of in the middle. And these are the students who might need it, but they're not going to drop out of college over this, right? Or they're going to be okay. Within each of those bands, then, you're still going to have decisions to make. And the ethicists conclude that rather than go first come, first serve within those bands, it's better to randomize. Now, I want to acknowledge, I know how controversial that is. I know we got feelings about lotteries, okay?
Yeah.
But I also got to tell you, they can be used for good things. And one of the things they're really good for are really tough situations like this, where there's no other way to pick among people. And you could spend hours, days, weeks agonizing and delaying your decision because you could not pick. And so the medical ethicists recommend, and we recommend in this guide, prioritization and randomization. And we lay out how to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
And so speaking of students most in need, it kind of like lines up this next question that I have for you. Given the financial pressures that many colleges are under because of COVID-19, are you seeing any practices in colleges and universities which, in your view, have the effect of diverting money from the students most in need?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that one way that colleges might distribute the CARES dollars is to say, well, this group of students, they were living on campus and we closed the dorms, so we should give them the money. Mm-hmm. If you look across the college campus, the students mainly who live in the residence halls are relatively advantaged compared to those who can't afford to.
Yep.
So I am very concerned that non-residential students are deemed to have less need than students who are living on campus. Now, maybe if everybody's required to live on campus, right? Maybe it's a requirement for the first year of college. Maybe giving the money to everybody makes sense. But the truth is there were plenty of people who could afford to live on campus, and you don't need to be giving those dollars to them. So I'm afraid that that's going to basically be what happens when colleges just try to do this fast and don't really think about equity.
Yeah. And so as advocates for low-income and first-generation students, as well as students with disabilities, what are some good practices we should be fighting for that our institutions adopt with respect to dispersal of this and other types of emergency grant aid? This is another question we've received.
I think that honestly, I understand why so many of us who work with these students are afraid about having applications, because these students struggle with applications. But to be honest with you, that's because applications are not well designed. They're perfectly good at getting through an application that is well designed. And equity has proven that. They're getting through the application. It's got an enormous set of questions and they're doing it in less than 2 minutes. It's because it's well designed. It doesn't ask the questions they don't know how to answer. You know, asking students some basic questions like, are you having trouble paying for food? Right? Do you not have a safe place to live? They can answer these questions quickly. So I think it's important to advocate for an application process that's fair and that is accessible, and to insist that the institution advertise it on everything. So every email, every website, every professor, I mean, there's going to be grades going out soon. They should send that link in there. It should go everywhere. But you know, to just say we're just going to look at the administrative data, which, as I explained, is not good data and does not necessarily enhance equity, I think, oddly enough, we want to work against that.
Thank you. And so, Sarah, just a few more questions we've got coming in. And so the next one is, how can we make sure that the students with whom we work do receive sufficient grant aid to meet their basic needs, not only for tuition, but for books and food, housing, and childcare during the crisis?
Yeah, so it's interesting, you know, the CARES dollars specifically call out food and housing and things like childcare, and they're not allowed to be used for tuition. So in terms of that, there are some folks who were concerned that students stopped out of college already because they lost their jobs and the college closed and all of this happened, and they are going to need tuition support in order to re-enroll, and these dollars are not allowed to be given to that. So I do want to say that tuition is still going to be an issue, but I think that the most important thing is that people urge their institutions and work with their programs to fundraise beyond the federal grants. So there's going to be a need for an ongoing emergency aid fundraising campaign at every college. And students' voices and students' experiences should be centered in those programs.
Yes.
So
Yes,
that does not mean, right, take a picture of a student and pin it up there to make that student perform their poverty for everybody. It means actually consider maybe hiring the student on an hourly basis to help create the emergency aid campaign and have them assist in designing it so that it is well done, and ensure that students who do want to lift up their voices to advocate for more dollars have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And so are there practices that we should be adopting during this crisis, but that we should be, which should be integrated into our programs in the new normal?
Yeah, you know, to be really honest, for years now, my team's been leading what we call the Real College Movement, which basically says that to be a student-ready program, you have to address basic needs. And I know that those of you who work in K-12 schools know this. I mean, it's probably actually hard to imagine that we walk around in college classrooms saying, why are you sleeping, without ever asking if you had anything to eat. We do it all the time. But to be honest, I know TRIO programs and others have long been the place where you could get a snack. We need to keep pushing on that, right? I think we really do need to become the places on campus where we say, first and foremost to every student, are you okay?
Yeah.
And let them speak about what's really going on, because so few of them feel safe doing so. So be the place. And our mantra in this movement is students are humans first. So we basically think that if you center that into all of your practice, you'll begin to get it right.
Last two questions we're getting in now. So are there other policies we should be fighting for at the institutional, state, or national levels to ensure that our country does not move backward with respect to equity because of this pandemic?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much, honestly. I think we're watching the health disparities play out, which are so not surprising given the massive racial and income and wealth disparities that we've seen. But in terms of a few things that I'm especially concerned with, I mean, states are going to have to prioritize funding to higher education as well as K-12 very soon, or a whole lot of public colleges and universities are going to fold. That's the choice they're going to have to make. So I believe now's the time to be very clear that we need them to pull money out of corrections and place it into higher education. I also believe we have to say now's the time to save money on the administrative burden that's created when you put in work requirements to every public benefits program, and just make it easier for people to get help. States can take those efforts even when the federal government doesn't. And then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the single best chance we have to fix this mess is this fall's election.
And so lastly, so we're done with questions from the audience, but just from COE's perspective, we would love if you could share with us anything else you think we might find particularly helpful about the Hope Center or any other area to share interest? That's a general question to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we really think that we have to change the conversation about who the college students are now and these places that they go to school. And so we really encourage, you know, talking to students and talking about students from a perspective of strength and from a perspective that emphasizes how hard they already work, and from a perspective that it does acknowledge that they're students first. And we do a tremendous amount of media work to try to give you opportunities to have stories that you can share on your social media about these major challenges they face and how they're trying to survive. I'm especially excited that Soledad O'Brien has a new documentary, a full-length documentary called Hungry to Learn, and that it really is a possibility that programs around the country could show that, whether streaming or on their own campuses, to try to galvanize the conversation about students' basic needs. There's a website called Good Docs where it's available, and it's not expensive. And I think that anything that you can do to try to help your friends and your neighbors and the people that you work with understand that students living in residence halls who had to go home to mom and dad and do classes online during this pandemic, they are not the majority. You know, talk about the people with children, talk about the people who had no home to go to, talk about the people who just got laid off, not just from 1, but 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
You got to keep saying it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your insightful presentation today. We really do appreciate it. We really do appreciate, of course, the partnership that you all have with the Council for Opportunity Education. And if there are any resources that you all would like to pursue, please do subscribe to the Hope for College or the Hope Center newsletter. You'll see the information on the screen below. And if you have any other questions, please do go visit coenet.org for more information from the Council for Opportunity and Education. This is Terrence Ham, the Associate Vice President for Communications and Marketing at the Council for Opportunity and Education. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today for your presentation. And this
Thanks, Terrence, for doing that for us. We will now resume our presentation and have you ask any other questions that. Maureen, are you on the line?
I am on the line.
Okay, so we had a couple that were still in the chat box from earlier. Many students who are not Pell eligible for 2019-2020 are now facing financial hardship. Have we asked the Department of Ed if these students can receive SSS grant aid?
Yes, we're asking that all of the legislative limitations, that it be limited to first and second year students, that it the minimums amounts, the matching requirements, that all of these be waived.
So, and just remember, we are asking, we have not heard a response about this. Someone said, although it's late, sounds like we can still buy laptops before and up to our virtual summer bridge program.
Right, if you have a virtual summer bridge program, that's, again, when you purchase these laptops that are supplies, they are not equipment, they are specifically allowable in your regulations. You can, but make sure that you, I'm not saying that it would not be allowable if you don't do this. I'm just saying this is good practice. When you put through that purchase requisition, saying we're purchasing X number of computers to loan to our students so they can participate in the X that is required because of COVID-19.
Any last questions that need to be answered? Please put into the question and answer box.
I think they got them all, Jelly.
I think so.
We'll wait a couple minutes, but that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, not a couple of minutes. Go ahead, Maureen, wrap this up.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. We're going to be continuing to try to press the department to answer the question, particularly about the end of the year, so that if you have unspent funds, it won't go back to the Treasury. We continue to press them on the stipends issue, and thank you all for the work you're doing. That's going to keep so many students in college and on the path to graduation and graduate school. Take care.
Take care. This ends our webinar for this morning. Have a good day.